Hey, deserving listeners, 90 Day Fiancé, the episode from this week. Let's watch. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. As I always say, don't use YouTube as a replacement for therapy. If you need a therapist, get one. You deserve it. Let's watch.
Jenny and Sumit, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, Evelyn.
Hi.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Evelyn, I think this is the most modest I've ever seen you dressed.
Oh my God. Wow, Steven.
It's not, no, it's just a fact.
So there's been a lot of little scenes with Steven already as they're preparing to start shooting the tell-all that just point at a general awkwardness. There's obviously no crime in being weird and awkward and socially inept, but or maybe he plays into it or something. I'm not quite sure, but and this is indicative of a lot of things that he's done. Is he trying to do it? Is it like a purposeful thing? He's like, oh, I'm going to be the weird one or the quirky one. I'm going to jump into a pool with my clothes on. I'm going to fart away from the table or something. It's hard to know. It looks like he just doesn't really understand how other people are going to receive him, or he, all of you, I'm sure, have friends, or maybe you're one of these people where, maybe the way you were raised in your family or your personality, you just end up being kind of weird. You're the weird one, and Steven seems to be exhibiting that. But there's also another element of hurtfulness, really, in the things that he says. I didn't show this, but he said, away from Kenny, he said, don't tell Kenny this, but he looks a lot older in person than he does on the show. Why would you say that? Now, maybe Kenny doesn't care. I suspect he doesn't care. But if you don't know someone, you're on camera, why would you say so? What would be the purpose of? There's be no reason. You could note that in your mind, maybe say it in private to someone else, maybe. But so is that ineptitude? Is it obliviousness? Or is there something about his personality that we could point to? And then he says right here, Evelyn, you look, this is the most modest I've ever seen you dress. I think what he means, modest, it's a weird word. I think what he means is more formal, because this is, I would agree that to my memory, we don't usually see her dressed conservative, maybe would be the word for it. But who cares is the thing. Like, why would you just bark that out in the middle of the tell-all? And it calls attention to her figure, I suppose. And is that how he's oriented? We could imagine that would be very true. Is it some other nefarious or problematic personality trait that's being exhibited right now, where he actually doesn't really care about other people's feelings, and or he likes to invade other people's spaces in a variety of ways? I think that there's some credibility to that line of thinking, and there's a general personality that we might be looking at. And I remember speculating on this early, before we knew about him cheating and all these other things. He seemed to think outside the box, and I think I talked about it way back then, that there's a spectrum of very low on the spectrum. Actually, a lot of therapists, including myself, are actually very low on this spectrum. I'll call it the lack of caring about what other people think. And on at the beginning of the spectrum, and then at the end of the spectrum, it's lack of empathy and callousness towards other people. But low on the spectrum, like as a therapist, we usually are more oriented to think outside the box. We're kind of rule breakers in a way, because we ask questions and we talk about things that society says we're not supposed to talk about. And I've always been that way. I remember being at parties when I was in college, and I didn't like small talk, and so I'd ask these very intense questions because I just wanted more intense conversations with people, and people would come around the corner at a party and expect us just to be talking about something frivolous, and they'd be like, whoa, you're talking about something real serious here, or you're talking about something very personal or whatever. And that is considered in my field to be emblematic of what we call psychopathic deviant scale in the MMPI, but there's other words for it. And it's this break from this tendency not to conform is another way to put it. And I've always kind of been that way as well. Like doing this YouTube channel is a little bit of a break from conformity, because the vast majority of people in my field do not make YouTube channels. And so the fact that I even consider that as an option means that I don't like being confined. I don't like being told what to do. And so like with him, he exhibits this as well, that it's like he has this policy about farting. You know, most people wouldn't go there, right? But he's like, well, you know, it's logical. I have to fart, so I want to go over here, and I don't care what other people think. I think this is logical. I want to go swimming, and I don't really care about being wet, and other people are going to think it's weird, but I don't care. I want to do it. I don't know if that's what we're seeing, but I remember speculating on that early. Then we start seeing other kinds of behaviors that we might consider to be further up on the psychopathic deviant scale, which is into more psychopathy and deviance. I can't know that about him, but at the very least, there's some yellow to red flags of him not really considering how his behavior will impact other people, namely Alina. And also we're seeing him saying things that are perhaps creepy and hurtful to Evelyn and also to Kenny. It's just like, but he does it with a smile, and he does it with this boyish charm, if you want to call it that. I know a lot of people don't think of him as charming, but I think that it's a boyish vibe, if you will, an innocent, naive vibe. But if you just kind of break down the behaviors and ignore the demeanor, then you have a lot of ticks in the column of someone who's on that scale. I don't know if he is. I want to be clear. One, because that's just true. And two, because some people misquote me. I've literally read articles that people will say, Dr. Kirk Honda says that so-and-so is a psychopath. And I'm like, I never said that. And then I look at the clip, I'm like, I was clear. I was I never said that. And two, I was, very much encapsulating it or bracketing it in all these caveats. So, but we use these shows as a jumping off, but we have no idea about him, and maybe we'll never even see him again on the show. But we can think about our own lives, ourselves, and I know some of you are actually on that spectrum. And it's important that when you're on that spectrum, that you take time to compensate. You have to compensate for the fact that you don't necessarily register other people's reaction. Like for me, when I was young, I was probably inconsiderate of other people more than the average person. Not because I didn't have empathy, but because I just didn't like following rules, and I didn't care about conventions. And so what that would do is other people would sometimes take that as if I didn't care about them. And sometimes it was inconsiderate, for sure. I'm trying to think of an example. But anyway, it was harmful to others. So I had to learn, I have to kind of pay more attention to how I'm impacting other people. And as I've aged, I've become much, practice makes perfect. I just do it a lot more. And I feel like I'm much better now at thinking about how I impact other people. Again, it's not an empathy thing. It's a noticing thing, or it's a fear-based thing. To talk about farting, to make a YouTube channel, you have to get past certain fears of like, well, what if people disagree with me, or what if people think that I'm wrong? Particularly in my field, honestly, like there's so much judgment among clinicians of like, that person's unethical. And I'll tell you, not so much anymore, but I've been doing this podcast for 13 plus years. When I first started doing this podcast, people would say I was unethical for having a podcast, which of course is totally ridiculous now. But back in the day, it was considered unethical for a therapist to speak in public. Not by the experts, they would never say that, but a good number of therapists thought that. So I had to say, well, I don't really care what they think. And So there's pros and cons to that, right? It gives me the freedom to do things that are against conformity that aren't necessary, and then it also makes it so sometimes I accidentally hurt people's feelings. The other part of this is that the conformity thing, when you are more normal regarding conformity, sometimes you will conform to the norms of society, not because of empathy, but because you just fear stepping outside of bound. You don't want to be outside of the bounds of normal behavior. And because we have this heuristic, this knee-jerk reaction typically of don't do abnormal things. And what that ends up usually equating to is behavior that is kind to other people, because we set up all these like manners and polite society behaviors that and protocols that are set up to be considerate of others. And if you follow these rules, you don't really have to have empathy all the time. You just follow the rules. So I want to delineate, the people who are not on the psychopathic deviant spectrum, they are sometimes they're seen as very polite and nice, but they're actually not necessarily any more empathetic than people who are lower on the scale like I am. And I've tested myself on the MMPI anyway and been tested. But Berto is also on that scale. A lot of therapists, it's actually a common therapist thing anyway, that for people that aren't on the spectrum but are following the rules, they might look very polite and nice and empathetic, but they aren't necessarily, because they're just following norms within society that are set up to consider other people's feelings. I hope that makes sense. And so who cares about Steven? I mean, I'm sure, I hope the best for him, but in terms of like the speculative part of it, we can use this as a jumping off point and kind of notice his behavior and maybe code them and think about ourselves and our own lives.
A lot to talk about there. Steven and Alina, what were you thinking as you were watching some of the events that played out in your relationship?
I definitely feel like I'm the worst person in this room.
Wow. Okay.
Except for
All right. So we're hearing from Steven that he watched the season, and he says, I'm definitely the worst person in this room. So that's interesting. I think a lot of us might hear that and go, oh, he's up to something. He's playing a game. This is impression management. Or is he being honest? I don't know. The way he said it, I would give it a 60% chance that he's honestly saying, wow, like, yeesh, that was, why was I doing that? And I've said this before, but for cast members to be able to watch themselves on the show, that it gives them this opportunity to really see themselves from the outside and think about, wow, is that how I'm coming across to people? And it's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to have a lot more self-awareness. So let's see what he learned.
Wow.
Oh.
Why do you think that Steven is the worst person in the room?
I don't support this kind of communication with opposite sex, and Steven doesn't listen to me and doesn't want to see my point of view.
Yikes. Are we hearing, I'm guessing we'll get details, that from Alina, that after marriage, he's continuing to cheat on her by flirting? It is cheating to flirt, even if you don't have any physical contact. I think most people would consider that to be infidelity, to be actively flirting with other women online. So that's a big, big yikes. And I guess it's a thing that he does where he'll take extreme responsibility for, or he'll take kind of responsibility for things, but then he just keeps doing it, because I'm trying to figure out why he said that earlier, was like, I'm the worst guy in the room. Is that his way of getting in front of the criticism so that he can disarm people and have more power with his behavior? I don't know. I could see that being a tactic, but let's see.
And I love you, and your opinion means so much to me. It's just, I feel like right now you're like really putting me on the spot. I give you control over, my social media. I deleted my Facebook. Like,
What a huge
what else do you
step.
want?
Alina, is there something more that has happened?
Okay, Sean has a great question that's coming up. But so he's saying, I've given you all this control. I deleted my Facebook. And she's like, oh, what a huge step. What I'm guessing that is saying is, big deal. You're still flirting with people online. So, like, just because you deleted your Facebook, that doesn't mean anything, really. So let's see what happens.
Than what we have seen play out during the season?
Are you still talking to girls online?
So?
Let's ask someone else some questions first. Is that okay, Sean?
You're not Sean. You can't say that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So that he is in this boyish way saying, can we talk with someone else? I don't know if we've ever seen that on this show, right? Where a cast member, other than like Angela, I guess it's notable, like who have we seen try to dictate how these things go? Is that part of that, nonconformity thing that he does? Is it part of his entitlement that he feels? I mean, certainly entitlement would be in there somewhere, right? Because, you're being asked, you're on television and you're being asked these questions, and it's extremely relevant what Sean is asking, and it's the whole point of these kinds of things. And we've seen other people kind of shut down, like Mike and Natalie would just kind of shut down and be like, well, what are you going to do? And he would just answer in these very vague ways, because I just think he didn't like to talk about certain things. But so we've seen pushback, but not this level of like, yeah, could you just like, talk, okay, Sean, I want you to talk to these other people, and then maybe like in 10 minutes come back to us or something, because he doesn't want to talk about something. I think it's another interesting indication of a personality. But it sounds like he's been up to no good. And so at this point, why? That's what's always just so what's so bogglesome. What boggles me about these individuals is they know they're on camera, and they know they're going to have to explain themselves. So why would they do this sort of stuff unless it was either some kind of purposeful thing, like they want it to be out there, or they just can't make decisions well, or they have a compulsion, or what's going on here, or he doesn't care about other people's feelings, like fundamentally what's happening.
Stephen?
Хочешь, я им рассказал? Или...
Oh my God, not in Russian.
Yeah, we all want to understand.
Yeah, in English, please.
Okay, so maybe I had it wrong. It seems possible that Stephen was actually thinking, I don't know if Alina wants me to talk about this stuff, because I don't want to hurt Alina by talking about this stuff. So that's maybe why he asked. Okay, I could see that.
To her in Russian.
Because I want to make sure she's okay with it, because I'm already in a pretty bad situation.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And that actually shows empathy, right? Of like, does she want me to talk about this? So I had it wrong, it seems. And I'm sure also he was not wanting to talk about it. But then I don't know if I show this clip, but she says, no, just talk about it. You might as well just confess and just own up to what you did.
Stephen, this is the couple's tell-all.
Yes, I have been. Okay, so that's the deal. I've been talking.
I want to make sure everybody realizes.
So it's such a weird case for a personality. The way that he talks is like that of a child, the attitude of it, like the squirminess and the yeah, like, oh, you caught me. It's like, this isn't a joke. This isn't funny. You're psychopathically harming another human being, or many human beings, because surely these other women don't know you're married, right? So the fact that you would admit to this, like, yeah, the way a child would admit to having eaten cookies late at night or something. Yeah, I ate the cookies. Like it's just a really interesting presentation. And actually, that might be why I think people are so triggered by him. I mean, early in the season, I would see comments of people just hating him, like from the first episode. And I was like, huh? Because I didn't know what I know now about him. So I think that there's something kind of like human adjacent about him that is triggering. Because when it's sort of like when you see a cartoon, when they really try to make a face, they try to use computer graphics to recreate a face, like Princess Leia in the Rogue One, which is one of my favorite Star Wars movies, by the way. But I wish they wouldn't have really tried to recreate Carrie Fisher, a young Carrie Fisher. They just, with computer, just created a young Carrie Fisher, and it just doesn't look right. You just kind of know that's not real, and it's the uncanny valley, right? It's like if you have a cartoon that is obviously not trying to be exactly like reality, then we let that go. But the closer you get to reality, then you start going into the uncanny valley where it starts to disturb you because it's not quite right. Is that what's happening?
Okay, we're laughing, but they're married.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
Alina and I had gotten in a fight recently, and I was really frustrated. And like last week, probably about 9 girls were sending me inappropriate messages and images of like.
All right, he's saying that they got in a fight. What was that about? I'd like to know that for my own curiosity. I could also imagine that the fight was about him wanting to be with other women, because it's like hard to imagine what they would really fight about, but who knows. And then he says that there were 9 women who would send him. Again, the way he phrases it, it's almost like, so who knows? But I think that, and I think some people have speculated about this, or have they? Or have I just, it's hard to know what I've read or what has just sort of gone through my mind, that he has learned over time that he can get away with things if he, 1, has a boyish kind of cutesy charm, and 2, has a religious-y way of talking about things, that because people think, because that languaging of so these women were sending me inappropriate pictures and messages. He's a grown man. Like, why can't you just say, yeah, I was getting boob pics and other kinds of things, and they were sending me texts saying they want to have sex with me. So it's like the way he phrases it, is it just the world he's in? I could see that being true as well. I mean, I think, in that religious LDS world. But I don't know. It's an interesting case study of a personality, I'll say that. And I have a hard time really figuring it out. And I think that if he wants to improve his life, he should sit down with someone and really figure himself out, because I think there's a lot of destruction ahead of him, self and others' destruction, if he doesn't figure that out and start to, get a hold of the reins of his own personality.
Their boobs and naked pictures. I started responding back, kind of encouraging that.
Oh my God, it's so bad.
We hear the exact same wording that he had before. It's interesting that he admits it, that we've seen other people on the show who don't admit it, or they admit it in this very weird way. He is saying what happened. He's saying, that these women were sending him pictures of themselves naked, and he says, yeah, and I was kind of encouraging it. He has this way of very much minimizing it, right? How do you kind of encourage it? I'm guessing it was send me more, or he might have even promoted it in the beginning of somebody like, hey, how you doing? Send me pictures.
You've reached out to 9 different women?
They reached out to me, and then I foolishly started sending pictures of myself and things like that,
Wow.
What kinds of pictures were you sending them, Stephen?
Just a selfie of my face. I was fully clothed.
And you've just got to be incredibly stupid to do this kind of thing. I mean, I don't know where he's doing this, but you know, there are people. So I'm guessing what happened was, so 9 people, I'm guessing that they're just fans of the show. So you just have to figure half of those 9 women were trolls who just got pictures from the internet and said they were a woman. And you just got to figure, right, that some of that's going to happen. I don't know. Maybe he has a way of verifying these individuals, but to what end, right? So, and this was the question I had when he was communicating with Masha, right? And God knows how many other women he was communicating while he was in Turkey trying to get married to Alina. What is the purpose of this? Because certainly you cannot, and I'm guessing these women are all over the world. He has a tendency to do that, right? You're married. So what's going through your head? I'm quite sure that as an LDS person, divorce is not on the table. So what is the purpose? You're not going to meet these people. You're not going to have sex with them. That's not possible, right? Or it's not likely. And I said this a while back with the Masha question, which is a narcissistic need for supply of, I want someone to, I need a constant flow of any kind of accolades I can get. And I have figured out a way to market myself on certain social media platforms to garner attention and contact with other women. It could even be like a compulsion that he has, because 9 people. So, and all the other behaviors that we've seen. I mean, that's what I'd want to add. Maybe Sean will. It's just like, you have a pattern of doing this. Why do you do it? You know, what are you hoping will come from this? Maybe they'll get to that.
And I was sticking my tongue out, and I have kind of a long tongue. And I was saying, like, wow, I have a really long tongue. It's too bad I don't know how to use it.
I mean, you know, people flirt the way that they flirt online, I suppose. And I'm sure he's not the first or the last dude to do that. I'm sure that's happening all over the place. In fact, there's a corner of like TikTok and YouTube where there's these guys that will, you know, and they'll get a lot of attention from people because they do that kind of stuff. They stick their tongue out. They, you know, it's a whole kind of genre of online flirting or something. So he's not abnormal in that way. But, you know, I'm sure a lot of viewers, including Ellie, are a little repulsed.
Or if they sent me a picture of like themselves nude, I'd be like, wow, you're so hot.
This guy is too much.
And again, because of his delivery or who he is or something, you just like, oh, isn't that funny? And then you're like, well, wait. He's married. And Alina is being victimized by his behavior. We need to be clear about that. Imagine being married to someone who did that and was just so matter of fact instead of like. So that's interesting. It's notable, right? I'm just trying to think, like, if it were me, if I had done something like that, what would I'd just be like, it's embarrassing. And Alina, I'm terribly sorry. I have a problem, clearly, and I'm so sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me, but, you know, I did this and this. There's something wrong. You know, you would expect that kind of attitude instead of, he, isn't it funny that these things happened?
Alina, did you know that?
Yeah, because those girls, they sent me all the screenshots and I've seen everything.
Then the women send the screenshots to her. So again, dude, what are you thinking? Like, I think there's a good percentage, if not all 9 of those women, were just trying to bait him. We're just trying to, figure out a way to engage with him so that they could, it's like your 15 minutes, if you will. And then you also might hate Steven, so you're trying to bait him into a situation so you can tell on him because you really want Alina to leave him. You know, it's like, what is going through your mind? And then the other possibility that I don't know if I've mentioned is that, does he really want to be married to Alina? Is he trying to sabotage it? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out why he would do these things.
Armando and I FaceTimed with them before the show started. I said, you're gonna get girls. I even got boobs sent to me. But I said, you're gonna have that happen to you and you need to ignore it all.
It's my fault.
It's interesting that Kenny, in an altruistic way, reached out and tried to help them, Steven in particular, with his own, with his own experience of being on the show. He's like, watch out, because these kinds of things happen. Just add that to another reason why we love Kenny and Armando. All right, well, that does it for that episode. If you haven't become a patron of the podcast yet, you can do so now by clicking the link below or just going to patreon.com or using the Patreon app to become a patron of the podcast. That's how we know that you really appreciate what we're doing and really support what we're doing. We wouldn't be able to do this. I wouldn't be able to do any of this stuff if it weren't for patrons actually becoming patrons. So thanks to everyone who already has, and if you've been considering it, maybe now is the time. It's up to you. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.